Hey folks, Quill18 here, and welcome to the continuation of my preview for Europa Universalis 4. At this point, I'm going to start answering questions that people have asked me about the game, so these videos are going to contain multiple smaller topics. We're going to start off right away with colonization. So several people have asked how it works in EU4, and is it significantly different? It's pretty similar to how things worked in EU3. Again, you got some slight differences because now your colonists are not currency, they're agents that you assign somewhere. But other than that, it works pretty similarly. You still have the issue with hostile natives kind of being a problem. You don't, as far as I can tell, you cannot increase the speed of colonization by putting an army on a province per se, but what it does is it protects against a native uprising. And one of the things that you can help is there's a significant penalty to colonization speed if there are hostile natives still living in a province. And if you've got an army in a province with hostile natives, there's a button you can click on the army tab that you can spend somewhere between, I saw again, between 30 and 90 military power to intentionally purge all the hostile natives. And then once they're gone, then the colony will build faster, and it'll also be safe from any native uprisings. So those are the big changes there. You still have you still have colony range is still a thing. At some point during the colonization step, you will discover what the resource in the area is. It will start making money. One of the interesting questions about colonization this time around that is a little bit newer from the last time is because the trade zones are sort of predetermined on the map. So what you're going to maybe want to do is pay attention to that and consider whether you want to make sure to build a monopoly of provinces in a place for a trade zone so you can really suck out all the trade yourself. Whether this is important or not is going to depend entirely on your trade strategy, what your opposition is, and so on and so forth. It might be nice to spread things out, or it might be nice to build everything in one particular area. It's going to depend greatly on what you're trying to do. One of the other things that you might want to do is establish a series of colonies around Africa. For example, if you're trying to just extend your naval range over to the Middle East or the Far East, for example, and especially if it's not colonization exactly that you're interested in, but trade, then that is much more important. You might not even care about the Americas, but if you can build that series of colonies around Africa and then further out east, then you gain more and more ability to influence the flow of trade from the Far East into Europe and really make a lot of money that way. So really interesting gameplay potential there. The next question, will there be comets? Yes, absolutely. I can attest to the fact that the comet event still happens and tends to hit you at exactly the worst possible time. So for those of you who don't know, comets are kind of, at this point, they're almost kind of an inside joke in the Paradox series, but classically in Europa Universalis, there's an event where people see a comet, people freak out, you lose 1 stability, and that still happens. Randomness, it's there. What can you do? I think there are also a few other references to comets throughout the game, for example, in some of the national ideas. Maybe, I think there was a reference to it in the Scottish development diary for one of their national ideas, I'm not sure. But yeah, it definitely still is there. Is there any special focus on non-European countries, such as China and Japan, and how they rule and how governments work? Yes, there's still some modification there. Now, the Japanese system that was present in EU3, I think it was potentially more developed in the Divine Wind expansion, the shogunate system and all that, that has been removed. It was another one of those things that Paradox decided, it's not actually fun, it's maybe a little confusing, so we're going to pull back out of that. But there are still special types of government types and mechanics involved in certain nations. I know, for example, the hordes really require quite a bit of warfare to sort of continuously go forward, and so on and so forth. Now, I haven't tested those nations entirely, and I think a lot of that mechanic is still somewhat being developed at this time, so there's not much I can really talk about it, and that would make sense. Probably stay tuned to the actual Paradox Plaza forums. There'll probably be some development diaries that deal with more of that as time goes on. But it will definitely be present, and it might be expanded. In fact, I would be surprised if those sorts of aspects don't become expanded in expansions in DLC. Crusader Kings 2 is very similar the same way. I mean, obviously you've got the Islamist states, the Byzantine or Orthodox states, the pagans, they all have a slightly different variant in how their governments operate, and so those were developed further as the DLC goes, so it might end up being the same sort of thing. But it's definitely in place. I know that I know a few people who have tried playing as the Native American tribes, which are kind of interesting and different in how they work, and certainly the hordes as well. So I can't speak much for the Far East nations, but there are definitely some different mechanics in play. We can do a couple more questions in this one. Oh, well, here we go. On the topic of things like DLC. So this was a question I asked on Reddit. I told them that I would be going and talking to Paradox developers and if they had any questions. And someone asked, and I think this might have been a bit of a troll question. It was downvoted on Reddit originally, but frankly, I think it's a perfectly valid question to ask and to look for answers. So this person had worded it as, ask them if they are starting to use some of EA's business strategies. Kind of a trolly way to say it. But, I mean, there are legitimate questions in terms of costing, DRM, and certainly DLC, right? So, so I asked them, because why not? First of all, Paradox has been consistently anti-DRM from the start. They don't, or no, maybe not from the start, but certainly now, their games don't tend to have any built-in DRM whatsoever. Now, obviously, if you're purchasing the game on something like Steam, well, Steam has some DRM built into it, but that's not, that's kind of not a Paradoxy thing. They don't think that it adds anything to the game. They think it punishes legitimate owners, and pirates will get around it anyway. So they don't tend to worry about that sort of thing. We did actually have a very kind of humorous discussion about, I don't know if you guys know this little indie game called Game Dev Tycoon. In it, they built in an anti-piracy feature where they literally uploaded their game themselves to some torrent websites. But that version of the game had events that would happen later where people would start. So in this game, you make your own computer games, basically. And in the game, there's an event later where people start to pirate your games and you go bankrupt because of it. So it's sort of a haha, learn your lesson type of thing. So we had a discussion jokingly about doing that sort of thing in Europa Universalis 4, but it was just a joke. But they have a pretty good sense of humor about the whole thing. So in terms of DLC, because that's the big question mark. DLC, some people hate them all the time. Some people love them to an excess that makes no sense whatsoever, and some people are kind of in between. The big question that's always for anything is, how much are you paying for any kind of content, whether the actual game itself or the expansions or the DLC? DLC, by the way, stands for downloadable content, and it can include things, for example, for the Paradox games, for say Crusader Kings 2, this includes things like some extra music, for example. Oh, you're playing the Orthodox nation. Well, we've gone ahead and gotten 3 brand new songs scored. I don't know, new songs. We've created them, we've put them together in this DLC package that you can buy for, a couple of bucks or whatever it is. If this is the sort of thing you're interested in, then here you go, and you can add it to your game. And some people might want that to be free, and some people understand that, you kind of have to pay musicians, for example. So, there's that sort of back and forth. And what I like about those is they are optional. If you like the music in the game, and they do have beautiful music, and if you want more variety to the music, well, there you have it. There's also more cosmetic features, face packs, so that your Mediterranean people look like Mediterranean people. So that's one type of DLC. Those tend to be relatively cheap and very, very optional. They also don't tie up a lot of programmer time. They just, let's keep our artists busy by throwing them this sort of job. And then there's the flip side where you have actual gameplay features. Now, what is the difference between an expansion that you download and DLC? It's a pretty fine line there. And in fact, the Paradox games, they call them expansions. So with Crusader Kings, you have the Republic expansion. You have the Sword of Islam expansion. You have the Old Gods expansion. Now, you download them, right? So they're downloadable content. But they're expansions, and they add gameplay. One of the things that was quite obvious with Crusader Kings 2 is Paradox is pretty generous with how it works. So these expansions add tons and tons of gameplay, new gameplay features, new gameplay rules. Well, those tend to be released to the actual base game for free as part of a free patch. So all the features of, say, the Republic expansion was just added to the base game. So now you have trade republics that have really involved and complex mechanics, and you have the new retinue system and a few other features like that. Everyone gets that for free. The only thing that you have to choose to pay for is if you specifically want to play as a trade republic. You want to play as Venice? Well, then there's the expansion. So again, it comes back to, it's not the question of whether DLC is good or bad. It comes out to, is the price worth it for the content that you get? Is it being forced on you or not? And certainly in this case, it has not been forced on you. There's one little exception with the Old God system in that you won't get the slightly new rebellion mechanic unless you get the actual Old Gods expansion. That is probably, to my mind, that's the only example of a feature that you don't get patched into your game for free, even if you don't buy the DLC in the past for the Paradox titles. And that's a pretty small exception. So personally, I really think that they have an excellent model with the DLC. I know it's been very successful for them. And most people are pretty happy. It allows them to sort of bundle things out faster. It keeps their team very busy. Because one of the things with a game development, is you've got this cycle where it's almost kind of a boom and bust kind of thing. There's a point in game development where you do not have enough programmers and artists and all these things. You just need more and more and more people. But then when the game is sort of finished and released, then you've got all these people sitting around, and what are you going to do with them? And what DLC ended up being is it really sort of fills in those gaps between game releases where you can keep different people busy. Plus DLC and these expansions tend to be slightly smaller release. You don't need all your engine programmers busy on that. They can be busy developing the engine for the next game. But your content creators, your sort of in-house modders and artists, you can keep them busy doing the DLC. So different people doing different jobs. And anyway, I think it works out well, and they are certainly aware of all the complexities of the business models, and to try to keep everyone as happy as possible. So, and yeah, their overall strategy is the base game should be good, high quality, and constantly updated. And so far, they have certainly proved that. I mean, you never know, they might turn evil, but so far so good. So I'm going to cut this video here, and we'll be back with some more questions in the next one. See you next time, folks. Bye-bye.